You can almost feel it, the stillness before the crowd exhales. The smell of tallow and iron fills your nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, and the sound rolls through the streets like a warning. You're standing among thousands, shoulder to shoulder, waiting not for a sermon or a coronation, but for a man to be unmade. The air feels wrong. It isn't just heavy, it's watching you back. Before we plunge into this day where the air itself seemed to pause, take a moment to join the story's circle. If you're watching from Edinburgh, London, New York, or somewhere far from these medieval streets, drop a comment and let us know. History is a strange bridge. It connects us across centuries and continents. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, tap the like button, subscribe, and let's walk together into the smoke of 1305. London, late August. The city stirs before dawn. Bakers light their fires, hawkers roll their carts over cobblestone. But the hum of trade is undercut by something sharper, anticipation. From the Tower to Smithfield, word has spread. The Scottish traitor has been brought to die. Crowds surge toward the heart of the city, filling windows, doorways, and rooftops. Mothers hoist children onto their shoulders. Vendors sell meat pies beside gallows posts. In a world where death is both punishment and entertainment, this is the greatest show of all. William Wallace has already been in chains for weeks. His capture near Glasgow was no battlefield defeat, but the slow tightening of betrayal. Once he had commanded men who would die for him. Now he rides bound behind English guards, paraded through towns where people jeer and spit. The journey south is long. Days of jolting over rutted roads, nights spent shackled in cold stone cells. Each stop is a rehearsal for humiliation. In York they call him the Beast of Scotland. In St. Albans a priest sprinkles him with holy water as if to cleanse the very road he walks on. The England of Edward III is a place obsessed with order. To rebel is not simply to defy the king, it is to offend God. And so the punishment must be both spiritual and physical, a ritual meant to terrify the soul as much as it destroys the body. Wallace's fate has already been decided long before his trial. The method, hanging, drawing, and quartering, isn't chosen for efficiency, but for meaning. It tells a story of power, obedience, and the annihilation of the self. When Wallace's escort finally reaches London, the spectacle begins anew. The tower looms like a great stone lung, breathing in the condemned and exhaling corpses. Within its walls, Wallace is not treated as a knight or even as a soldier. He is a thing to be displayed. Chronicles suggest he was kept in irons so tight they left wounds around his wrists. Each morning, guards lead him to a narrow window slit, not for light, but so Londoners can catch a glimpse of the Scottish devil. It is theater, one act of degradation after another. Edward Longshanks is not present in person, but his will hangs over the proceedings like a sword. The old king, weathered by years of war, understands the value of spectacle. He knows a dead rebel is only half useful. A broken one is worth far more. The message must be absolute. Rebellion will not just be crushed. It will be erased from memory, burned from the flesh. On the eve of August 23rd, Westminster Hall is prepared for the trial. The judges, all English, arrive in scarlet robes. Wallace is brought in unshaven, gaunt, but still upright. He refuses to kneel. When the charge of treason is read aloud, he answers not in submission, but defiance. I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. The silence that follows is not of respect, but of calculation. The verdict is predetermined. The line will simply be recorded in Latin, where truth can be buried under formality. That night, the city buzzes like a living thing. Carpenters hammer together the scaffold at Smithfield, tightening ropes, testing beams. The executioner sharpens his knives beneath a hooded lantern. Vendors prepare for dawn. Some say the smell of sawdust and blood already hangs in the air. The authorities ensure that the procession route will wind through the busiest streets, so the people will see every inch of Wallace's final humiliation. In taverns, men place wagers on how long the Scotsman will last. Children practice shouting curses. Yet somewhere among the throng are those who whisper prayers in Gaelic, barely audible above the din. They know what this death means. The English wish to end a man, but what they truly seek to kill is an idea, that a people might rule themselves. When dawn finally bleeds over the Thames, a hush falls. The crowd shifts like a tide. From the Tower gates, a wooden hurdle creaks forward, drawn by horses. Bound to it lies William Wallace, his hair matted, his eyes fixed on nothing the living can see. As he passes beneath the city's banners, the crowd roars, not all in hatred, but in awe. Some say the sky that morning was cloudless, yet the sun seemed dimmed, as if unwilling to witness what was to come. The air holds still, thick as glass, and in that breathless moment before the first movement of the procession, London itself seems to stop breathing. Westminster Hall, August 23, 1305. Morning light filters through narrow stained-glass windows, casting crimson streaks across the flagstones. Beneath the gilded ceiling where angels and kings are painted in eternal judgment, William Wallace stands alone. He wears no armor, no chain of office, only coarse linen and iron at his wrists. The echo of footsteps, the whisper of parchment, and the rustle of robes form a strange symphony, the sound of power preparing to make an example. To the English court, this day is not about justice, it is about theater. The room has been arranged for spectacle. The great hall of England's governance, built to awe those who entered, now becomes a stage where law and vengeance merge. On a raised dais sit the judges, cloaked in scarlet, their seats arranged like thrones. At their center, the king's seal glimmers in wax, Edward's invisible hand guiding every word. Wallace does not kneel. This defiance is not pride. It is principle. The chroniclers who later record the scene note how his eyes refused to lower. When the herald reads the charges in Latin, preditio, homicidium, incendium, treason, murder, arson, the words fill the air like smoke. The charge of treason strikes the deepest note. Treason presumes allegiance, and Wallace's entire defense hangs on that single paradox, that he could not betray a king he had never sworn to serve. "Never was I the man's subject," he says, his voice steady, almost detached. "I took up arms not for gold nor crown, but for the freedom of my country." The words ripple through the chamber, unsettling in their calm. The clerk does not record them. History must belong to the victors. The presiding justice, Sir Peter Mallory, raises his hand. "Then you confess to rebellion," he says, his tone sharp as a blade. Wallace gives no answer. Silence fills the hall, dense, deliberate. It is not the silence of defeat, but of finality. He knows the verdict has already been written, likely days before his arrival. In medieval England, trials of this kind are less about guilt than about choreography. Each word, each gesture, serves a ritual purpose. The accused stands not as a man but as a symbol, a stand-in for every peasant, knight, or noble who might dream of defiance. The court is both altar and dissecting table. By naming Wallace a traitor, the Crown does not merely condemn him, it rewrites reality. It asserts that Scotland itself is already England's possession, and that resistance is not war, but crime. The sentence is read aloud with ceremonial precision. Wallace is to be drawn from the Tower to Smithfield, hanged until near death, cut down, disemboweled, his entrails burned before his eyes, then beheaded and quartered. Each act carries meaning. The drawing signifies degradation, his body dragged like refuse through the streets he once threatened. The hanging marks divine rejection, his soul suspended between earth and heaven. The disembowelment purges the traitor's corruption, while the quartering scatters his identity to the winds. In that moment, the machinery of medieval justice reveals its true face. not as law, but as ritualized obedience. To break the body is to command the nation. To make agony visible is to make loyalty instinctive. The judges pronounce the sentence as though reading a prayer. Wallace listens in silence, his face unreadable. Perhaps he has already withdrawn somewhere far beyond this hall, to the heathered hills of Lanark, where the wind still carries the memory of his first rebellion. Outside, the city hums with expectation. Smithfield's scaffold is ready. The executioner sharpens his knives beside the pyre. The crowd grows by the hour. London's magistrates have ordered barrels of ale and wagons of bread. Public punishment demands public appetite. But inside Westminster the air feels motionless, as though the hall itself is reluctant to breathe. There are witnesses who will later claim that Wallace smiled as the sentence was read. Perhaps it was not a smile of defiance, but of recognition. An understanding that this act of cruelty, meant to erase him, would instead engrave his name into history. The human body can be torn apart. An idea cannot. The court clerk dips his quill in ink and records the final line of the proceedings. Iste Wilhelmus Wallace adjudicatus est trahi et suspendi. William Wallace is condemned to be drawn and hanged. The Latin is cold, mechanical, eternal. As the parchment dries, the guards seize his arms and lead him out beneath the gaze of saints painted on the walls, figures that have watched 1,000 such sentences and will watch 1,000 more. The crowd outside surges forward as Wallace emerges. Chains clatter. The sun glints off the steel manacles that bind his wrists. He is loaded onto the wooden hurdle, the same one that will drag him through London's veins. Somewhere, a priest murmurs a prayer that no one hears. Behind him, in the hall he has just left, the judges remove their robes. Their duty is done. To them, this is not cruelty but order restored. Yet their words have set something irreversible in motion. The act they believe will extinguish rebellion will instead breathe life into myth. The anatomy of obedience has been laid bare, but the heart that beats beneath it is rebellion itself. As Wallace's procession begins to move toward Smithfield, the echo of the court's sentence lingers in the vaulted air. The parchment will be sealed, the ink will dry, but something unseen has escaped those walls. The law has done its work. Now, the body must finish the story. The morning of August 23, 1305 began not with birdsong, but with the hammering of nails. Smithfield, a broad open space just outside London's city walls, was being remade into a theater of death. Carpenters worked through the dawn, their mallets striking wood in rhythm, sealing together the scaffold where William Wallace would take his final breath. Around them, the city awoke in strange celebration. Merchants rolled carts heavy with bread and ale. Children perched on fences for a better view. London's sky, pale and indifferent, watched as men built not an execution platform but a monument to fear. The route from the Tower to Smithfield had been carefully planned. Wallace would not simply die, he would be seen dying. As the horses dragged his hurdle through the winding streets, the cobblestones scraped his back raw, leaving streaks of red that glistened in the morning light. The crowd followed, roaring, jeering, reaching out to throw filth and mock blessings. Some spat the words "traitor," while others merely stared, silent and uncertain. In his bound form, the rebel was both monster and mirror, a reflection of the violence required to keep an empire breathing. At Smithfield, the air shimmered with heat and noise. Vendors shouted, dogs barked, and somewhere a church bell rang the hour of prime. It was 9 o'clock when the executioner stepped forward, hooded, his knife glinting at his belt. Wallace was hoisted to the scaffold, the crowd pressing closer. No proclamation of guilt was needed. The sentence had been delivered, and now it was to be performed. They began with the hanging. The rope looped around his neck, tightened, and he was lifted from the platform just enough for breath to become agony. The intention was precision, not mercy. The executioner's task was to bring Wallace to the edge of death and hold him there. His body convulsed, his vision dimmed, but the neck did not break. After long moments of strangled gasping, The rope was cut, and he fell, alive, barely, into the sawdust below. The crowd erupted. To them, this was a proof that divine justice had turned its face from Scotland's champion. Then came the drawing of the knife. Accounts from witnesses, monks, clerks, even foreign envoys, record that Wallace did not cry out, though his body shook violently. The executioner opened his abdomen, careful and methodical, pulling out the entrails one by one, holding them aloft for the crowd before tossing them into a brazier. The smoke that rose carried a smell no one present would ever forget. To burn the bowels of a condemned man was to purify his treason, to make his suffering an example sanctified by fire. Some said Wallace's lips moved even then, whispering prayers. Others swore he looked upward, eyes wide as if seeing something far beyond the scaffold and the mob. The executioner continued his work, slicing, scraping, ensuring the man's consciousness lingered long enough for every onlooker to understand. Rebellion ends not in glory, but in ash. Finally, mercifully, his head was taken. One stroke, a dull thud as it struck the wooden planks, a roar from the crowd that rolled across Smithfield like thunder. The rebel was dead, but even in death, his body remained a tool of the state. The head was placed in tar, mounted on a pike, and carried through the city toward London Bridge. There, above the dark waters of the Thames, it would grin down for years, blackened, preserved, and unblinking. Each passing ship would see it. Each traveler would remember. His limbs were quartered, each piece dispatched to Scotland, Stirling, Perth, Newcastle, Berwick. The message was clear. Rebellion is not only punishable, it is divisible, scatterable, annihilated in parts. Yet in trying to erase him, Edward's men carved his memory deeper into the earth. Scotland heard of Wallace's death not through heralds, but through whispers. The tale passed from mouth to mouth, from village to glen. Mothers wept, soldiers swore vengeance, and in candlelit churches, priests invoked his name not as a traitor, but as a martyr. He died as a free man, one chronicler wrote, and his death taught us what freedom costs. The English intended his dismemberment to divide the Scots. Instead, it bound them. In the years that followed, resistance flickered back to life. Robert the Bruce would rise, uniting clans once sworn enemies, wielding the same dream Wallace had bled for. And though Wallace's bones were scattered, his name became whole again, reborn as legend, sung in halls, carried in secret prayers, whispered by rebels yet unborn. Even England could not escape the ghost it had made. Foreign envoys spoke of the barbarity at Smithfield. Clerics questioned whether such cruelty could ever serve God's law. In time, the execution that was meant to frighten nations would instead shame its authors. The scaffold had done its work, but the story refused to die. Centuries later, London Bridge would be rebuilt. The heads long gone, the river flowing beneath indifferent and gray. Yet every so often, in the low fog rolling off the Thames, people swore they saw a figure at the parapet. A face pale as wax, eyes fixed northward, perhaps memory itself, refusing to rest. The body of William Wallace was destroyed utterly. But the man, the idea, the defiance, those could not be burned or buried. England killed his flesh, Scotland kept his fire. And on that morning in Smithfield, beneath the noise and smoke and iron, history itself learned a terrible truth. You cannot truly execute a symbol.